I'm sure you hear all the time that you're supposed to stop at absolutely nothing to reach each and every one of your students. Now, that's easy to say and easy to agree to, but that idealism can quickly go up in smoke after a few months of facing the seemingly endless challenges of trying to teach a classroom full of real students. Is it actually possible to design a lesson in such a way that it reaches all of your learners? It is, and I'll show you exactly how in this video. This is the fourth video we've put together in a 6-part series about engaging today's students while building the classrooms of tomorrow. In the previous videos, we've discussed why it's so important for us to change our approach to education and why Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, offers the clearest vision for what that change might look like. UDL is all about empowering students to become more self-directed learners. And in the second video, I showed you 3 types of choice boards you could use to get started. Then in the last video, I argued that making creativity your #1 priority puts you on the pathway toward ensuring you've built a classroom optimized for learner variability from the ground up. Be sure to check those videos out if you haven't already. The links are in the video description. Universal Design for Learning is a learning design framework developed by the Center of Applied Special Technology, now simply known as CAST, with the goal of helping educators create learning environments that are as accessible as possible for as many students as possible. However, the term universal design actually predates education. Universal design was originally coined to describe an architectural movement to design more inclusive built environments. To give you an example, an architect might apply the concept of universal design to a building by incorporating ramps in the original model in order to increase accessibility for people who need an alternative to stairs. Even though the original reason for incorporating ramps might be to enable people with wheelchairs to more easily navigate the building, it would also be helpful for people even if they aren't using a wheelchair. Now, one misconception about Universal Design for Learning is that it's another way of saying differentiation. There's a subtle but important difference here. UDL is a proactive strategy. It seeks to build accessibility and inclusivity directly into the design so that anyone can access it from the start. The purpose of differentiation is also to increase accessibility, but it does so in a more reactive manner. Applying differentiation to architecture, for example, might look like trying to figure out how to come up with a ramp-based solution for a building that has already been built with only stairs. In education, both approaches seek the same outcome: make learning more accessible for more students. But I agree with the many people out there that it's best to try to open up our lessons as much as possible at the level of design and minimize the need to have to go back and add special accommodations after the fact. Though, of course, sometimes that might still be needed. Realizing the vision of a more inclusive, student-centric classroom where students truly take ownership of their learning requires us to provide ample opportunities for learners to reflect, revise, and express themselves creatively. To achieve this, we must first take full ownership of our own teaching. And just like with students, taking ownership requires reflecting on our practice, revising our lessons to make them more open and accessible, and expressing ourselves creatively through our lesson design. Fortunately, we can use CAST's UDL framework to help guide us in this process. The framework is organized into 3 principles, each of which align to brain science research: the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. More specifically, UDL calls on us to offer multiple means of engaging learners, multiple means of representing knowledge, as well as multiple means of expressing understanding. Each principle has guidelines, and each guideline has checkpoints. For example, under the principle provide multiple means of action and expression, which is about offering choice in how students show knowledge, one guideline is to provide multiple means of expression and communication, and one checkpoint describes how to use multiple media for students to communicate what they've learned. An example would be to create opportunities for students to use social media and interactive web tools. So you can see that UDL provides us with specific action items we can use when creating the blueprint for our classroom redesign. But here's the thing, there's so much here. Where would you even start? I think this is actually where a lot of people get stuck. Creating a more open and inclusive classroom sounds great in principle, but once you look at what it actually entails, it can start to feel overwhelming. That's why it's incredibly important to apply another core universal design for learning principle. Approach your lesson design by thinking about barriers and entry points. When planning, ask yourself, what barriers to learning might exist in this lesson or in my classroom in general? For example, a barrier to your plan to have students type final drafts of essays might be that some students don't know how to touch type. After you've identified those barriers, the next step is to consider how you can convert them into entry points with the goal of reaching more learners. For example, if you know some students won't know how to touch type, you can teach the entire class how to use voice typing. In the previous video, I argued that you should make creativity your #1 priority. Encouraging students to be creative has the potential to address several significant barriers to learning at once. Let's say that you currently feel as though these barriers are present in your classroom, that students don't see the value in what they're learning, that they don't understand its real-world applicability, and that there aren't a lot of opportunities for students to fully express themselves. You could turn those barriers into an entry point by considering how you might revise an upcoming assignment for relevancy, value, and authenticity. Start by identifying something on the horizon you think will likely present these barriers. For example, it might be an assignment like an essay. Hold off on the impulse to replace the essay with another activity and first take into consideration what learning objectives you're attempting to achieve through the original activity. Maybe it was going to be an argumentative essay, and students were going to learn how to come up with a claim and then how to find accurate evidence to support that claim. Now that we've identified the main purpose of the assignment, we can brainstorm some ways that people would authentically present an argument in the real world. People might do that by writing a blog, an op-ed article for a newspaper, publishing a YouTube video, or making a podcast. Knowing that a key component of UDL is to offer students choice, you might be tempted to just take all of these ideas and put them on a choice board and then allow students to choose. But I wouldn't recommend that at first. Instead, I think it's preferable to pick one of these, optimize it for student choice and voice, and then you could offer students the whole array of choices later in the school year. Right now, podcasting is really standing out as a preferred method for people to present their ideas, beliefs, and arguments in the real world. So having them create a podcast to make their argument would definitely help optimize this assignment for relevancy, value, and authenticity. And since podcasting offers an alternative means of showing knowledge through digital media, it also helps create an entry point in the area of using multimedia for communication. Now, I bet your wheels are already spinning, thinking about all the potential things that could go wrong here. If you're thinking like that, that's good. It means you're already putting yourself in the mindset of anticipating potential barriers. The trick is to make sure we're turning those barriers into entry points. Let's look at a couple of examples so you can get a sense of what this might look like. To start, even though making a podcast might have more inherent appeal than writing an essay, we can't just assume that every single student is going to see the value in making a podcast right off the bat. We can create an entry point here by proactively helping students understand why podcasting is valuable and relevant for their lives by having students explore podcasts based on their interest. Say, for example, that a student wants to become a gamer. They could explore to see if gamers they look up to have their own podcasts, as well as what gaming-focused podcasts are out there. To further optimize for relevancy and value, we could have students research why people make podcasts and then report that back to the class. They might discover, for example, that podcasting is often a part of someone's online business, and it's a way for people to participate in the creator economy. We could continue to create more entry points here by having a discussion about all the other elements that go into podcasting: research, writing, interviewing, graphic design, marketing. A student may not ultimately want to become a podcaster, but they may be interested in some of the other behind-the-scenes work. To help students feel as though their podcasts are as authentic as possible, you could tell them that they'll be sharing them with the rest of their classmates, and then they'll listen to each other's and give each other feedback. Or you could even make a plan to post them on the school website or submit the podcast to a local radio station's contest. Another barrier that presents itself with really any assignment is that students feel restricted, like they don't have the ability to choose for themselves. This could be a barrier with our example if we gave students the topics of their podcasts. So instead, we could create an entry point here by optimizing the assignment for student choice. If the main objective is for students to present an argument, perhaps you can make it completely open and they can choose whatever topic they want. But if it has to be science-based because you teach science, you could define the broader theme, like say pollution, but then have students choose the actual argument that they would be making. You could also allow students to choose whether or not they want to conduct an interview or to record a monologue, and they could even choose if they want to work alone, work with a partner, or work with a group, as well as choose where they would like to set up and do all their preparation in your classroom. Of course, that's just scratching the surface. There are many other potential barriers and opportunities for creating entry points with something like a podcasting project. In truth, the barriers you decide to tackle by creating entry points depends solely on one important factor: your students. The goal of Universal Design for Learning isn't perfection. It's about empowering us with an approach to lesson design that helps us deliver on the promise of educational equity. Now, all of this might sound great, but there's still a glaring assumption in all the material we've presented and in the UDL framework itself that you have the skills and knowledge to actually implement all of these strategies and techniques. Take a choice board, for example. How do you actually make it? What's the best program to use? How will you distribute it to your students? And if you're planning to introduce all this choice and creativity, how are you actually going to teach students how to use the programs? Do you plan to model that live by projecting your screen, or are you going to make pre-recorded video tutorials? If you're going to make video tutorials, how do you know that students actually understood the key points of that tutorial? And what kind of backwards planning would you have to do to help students effectively create with technology? That's exactly why we've created 21st Century Teacher, to give you a bigger picture understanding of how to use technology in order to create more entry points, as well as what's required in a real classroom setting to make it happen. What's more, 21st Century Teacher is learning by doing. You'll be learning new concepts through choose your own adventure lessons, choice-based assignments, collaborative activities in a variety of EdTech apps, game-based learning, and much, much more. The idea is for you to be able to experience programs and strategies as a learner, and then learn how to use those apps and strategies with your own students. In the past, our programs have sold out in mere hours, which is why we created the early bird waitlist. Adding your name to the list means you'll get the links sent to you a full day before 21st Century Teacher becomes available to the general public, and getting your name on it is likely the only way you'll be able to secure a spot. So if you're interested in learning all the skills and knowledge you need in order to become a 21st Century Teacher, then be sure to get your name on that wait list, and I hope to see you there. In the next video, I'll be revealing the exact method we've put together to help you put theory into practice. So be sure to check that out. You can actually watch that video by clicking right there, or at least you will be able to in a couple of days, so I'll see you there.